morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigelski. And folks, we have a hot one today. He is the CRO over at Gong. He was previously CRO at TalkDesk. He was the interim CEO and president at MX. He was the interim EVP of Global Sales after being the SVP of North America Enterprise Sales at Qualtrics. And he is a star-studded sales leader. Nick, why should people listen?
So there were two really awesome themes we did on this one. The first one was around how you build the best high-performing sales organization, starting with your ideal candidate profile. And then we got deep into how Shane is running interviews and how he is testing his sales leaders to make sure they are bringing the right people aboard. From there, we got into the operating rhythm of how Gong's leadership team, Shane and his team, keep the organization moving forward to consistently close deals, grow the business, etc. This was an extremely fun one.
And 3, 2, 1, let's roll. Alrighty, Shane, welcome to the show. We start every show with your top 3 actionable leadership takeaways. Let's get your 3.
Great to be here. Appreciate you guys making the time to have me on your podcast. Takeaway number 1 is really about people. And I found throughout my career that great teams are built by individuals and people. And what I've learned is that when I arrive at each company, I need to spend quite a bit of time at making sure that I'm very clear on what the ideal candidate profile should look like, who we should be hiring, how we should be targeting those individuals. And then I work with teams to make sure that we're aligned on what are the interview questions that we're going to use that will actually allow us to test for certain skills, experience, or basically, character that we're looking for in top performers. And then finally, it's getting dialed into what does the panel interview style look like? How are we going to try and move people through that process as quickly as possible? And I find that if we can get alignment in those areas, it allows us to ensure that not only do we get people that are going to fit what we're after, but they're much more successful because we spend the time up front on defining what that ideal candidate profile looks like and what the process is going to be that we're going to try and move them through.
What's number 2?
Number 2 is about Manager Operating Rhythm. The acronym is MOR. And the big learning for me here is everyone comes to a company, and in some cases, you're expected to know exactly what to do. People arrive at different times. If you don't spend the time to define what great looks like in your daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly cycles, everyone's going to be singing from a different sheet of music. And while people can play individual instruments really well, it ends up sounding more like a circus rather than a symphony, and makes it really hard for people to create beautiful music and have harmony across the business. So if you can spend time, and by the way, this doesn't have to be from a CRO, any individual on the front line can actually take the time to say, hey, can we get aligned on what does the standard procedure or standard operating rhythm look like? How are we going to forecast? How are we going to create territories? How are we going to do deal reviews? How are we going to run one-on-ones? All of those are opportunities to ensure that you have alignment on the consistency around manager operating rhythm.
Boom. Alrighty, consistent rhythm. Bring us through number 3.
The third one for me, and a little bit biased here, I acknowledge, after having worked at Gong, conversational intelligence is a multiplier and a game changer. And please, frontline leaders, do not be fooled. Call recording or note-taking does not equal conversational intelligence. And so the big learning for me is, for years throughout my career, I've had to threaten, bribe, coerce people to put information into a system or database. That's been for my benefit, so I can make better decisions, so I can keep track of people. The problem is there's only about 50 words that make it into a database after a call. You exchange about 5,000 to 6,000 words in an average meeting. That's 1% of the information, and usually it's very subjective information that's coming in. It's not the actual contextual information. Typically, you'll see, hey, awesome meeting, deal's going to close at the last day of the quarter. Very typical. Does not give you the contextual information. When you use conversational intelligence, it's able to automatically update a lot of the fields that are available. Sellers today are spending 77% of their time in non-selling activities. Typically, a lot of that is actually updating systems. We're able to give people back 4 to 6 hours a week when they're using the conversational intelligence the right way. It leads to higher quality discussions with your leader. It leads to you identifying where you have gaps in behavior. And when you use the tooling that is available through the intelligence, it actually makes you way more effective. It plays out directly in your win rates. And so, if I were to leave tomorrow and go to another company, I would never run a revenue organization again without having true conversational intelligence that is connected and integrated through the rest of the sales tech stack to make me more effective and knowledgeable in my daily routine.
Right, Shane, I want to go back to that first takeaway that you gave around the ideal candidate profile. I would presume that if you asked 10 average sales leaders about the type of seller that they wanted to hire, almost all of them would say, we want to hire great salespeople, and it'd be a bonus if they have industry experience. I assume that is nowhere near as specific as the ICP candidate profile that you put together at Gong, TalkDesk, Qualtrics, etc. So talk to me about what a good ideal candidate profile looks like.
Let's start with the easy one here. Like the old school skill will matrix, 4 quadrants. You're testing for effort and energy that people are putting in on the x-axis, on the y-axis. Then on the x-axis, you're looking at the skill they have. I would always recommend to hire for will on that y-axis and then teach skill over time. Based on the segment of business you're looking at, whether it's an SDR, a commercial, mid-market seller, or maybe you're getting into enterprise and strat, that's where you start to graduate on the skill portion of that matrix. We have all sorts of questions that we put together that actually test for skill. A few of them are things that people wouldn't even imagine. How did you grow up? What motivates you? You find that people that grew up where they had to fight and actually earn their way, or maybe they were heavily involved in some form of competition, whether it's athletics, music, they've been tested, they've been used to competition. Those individuals seem to have a higher propensity for a larger amount of will that comes out of them. You can also ask a question like, what did you do to prepare for this interview? Many times you'll find that people that aren't putting the preparation in don't have necessarily the desire to be at your company, nor do they have the will to prepare for what's going to be required. So up front, we spend quite a bit of time looking for the right motor based on what it's going to take for them to be successful. Then we get into different compartments of expertise, and it's going to vary based on the role they're asked to take. So for example, let's shift over to customer success for a moment. If you're supporting and servicing smaller SMB customers, we can teach you a lot of the skill that you're going to need to be able to have to be successful. Versus if you're working in enterprise, you need to have more industry knowledge, you need to have more consulting expertise. So in that enterprise segment, we're going to ask you more questions about how do you move someone off of an idea that they have today? How do you challenge a thought they have about how they should be using a certain technology? How do you drive change management? When have you had success doing that? And the most important one is, how do you connect to business outcomes? How do you make sure that what they're buying from you is connected to a business problem or pain, and that you've been able to understand and articulate the connection between the two so that as they start using whatever solution or technology you're offering them, it actually is able to be measured and quantified. That's where it really gets into, do you have a real customer you're adding value for that plays out in your retention and your expansion numbers that is the lifeblood of every single business?
These are killer questions. I'm curious about when you're interviewing leaders, what some of those questions sound like. I'm sure you ask some of the similar, what did you do to prepare? How did you grow up, etc. Are there any leadership specific interview questions that you ask?
Yeah, I got to be careful here because I've noticed lately people start listening to these that do care, and then they come like too prepared. I have a few questions I use that I'm going to hold in my back pocket because when I ask them, usually the response is, "Hey, I've never been asked that before, so I got to keep a couple in the back pocket." But what I'll ask things around performance, like tell me about a time when you led the most successful team that you've led, and how did that come to be? And what I want to understand is, were they intentional? Did they build and construct the team? Did they have to make any pivots or changes on the team? Did they have to manage low or non-performers out? And then the follow-on questions are, well, how did you do that? What did you learn from that? And that's where you try and get into them talking about specific examples and see, is there learning? Is there ownership on where they potentially got things wrong? Like I really like to see vulnerability and accountability. Like people are willing to acknowledge that they've made mistakes, they've had to learn from that. This idea that people learn and grow is probably one of the most undervalued skills that you can find in any level. If you find people that are curious, willing to ask questions, and then they're thoughtful about their answers, that's usually an indicator that you got someone that you can mold. And back to the skill will, I'll take people that have high will with curiosity, because over time, not only going to figure out how to succeed and thrive in that role that you're hiring them for, but chances are they're going to blow way past that and end up progressing to new heights inside your organization. So I would say really test even with leaders for curiosity and a desire to learn, And there's all sorts of questions that folks can come up with that will help you to identify if you have that type of DNA.
I'm curious, Shane, you've probably interviewed some leaders recently. Do you have an example of a story where someone admitted that they got something wrong? And what was a good answer you heard? Because I imagine a bad answer is, yeah, I hired like 3 times as many reps as I should have, and then I had to fire half of them, and I'm probably not going to do that again. Like, that's not a very compelling answer. But what would be a good way to describe something that you've done wrong in the past?
I don't think of any specific moments where people have owned up to what they've done wrong. What did come to my mind when you asked that question is I have multiple situations where someone, usually when they get to me as the CRO, they've gone through multiple stage gates. And so a lot of times people think it's just a sell through. And quite often I'll nitpick and try and find something that I feel is a yellow flag. And if I find too many yellow flags, I'll go back to the team and say, team, I don't feel this is the right person for the role. Here's why. And usually in the interview, I will tell the candidate as well, look, I usually watch for yellow lights or yellow flags, we'll call them. I usually don't get many red flags. But one of my favorite things to do is to tell a leader, this isn't the right candidate. We need to keep looking. And I'm watching to see if my leader is actually going to push back and challenge me, which when they do, I love it because now I know that I've got someone that feels passionately about a candidate. I then love it when they tell the candidate, our CRO thinks there's some challenges here. You may not be fit. And I'm usually looking for, does the person really want to be here? Have they bought into what we're doing, what we're trying to build and create? And are they so committed to that they're going to push back and say, hey, you know what? I am the right person. And I have countless examples where 6, 9, 12 months later, an individual will find me at like an offsite or reach out to me directly and say, hey, I know you weren't a believer. I've proven you wrong, to which I'm always thrilled to come back and say, I love being wrong. Great work. Let's go figure out what else we can do together. So that would be an example of where maybe not the right failure, but where people have, I put up like an obstacle and I'm waiting to see like, how badly do you want it? Because all day long, they're going to be hit with obstacles. When they're hit with an obstacle, how do they respond to that? And that usually gets back to the grit, the determination, the will that they would have as individuals. So I think there's ways to test folks within an interview process without like completely turning them down in a way that will give you a chance to see like how badly do they fight? Is there like this internal, desire to win?
So one of the things that stood out to me that you said to us on the pre-show is you, despite literally running basically the entire customer-facing org at Gong, you are still the final step in pretty much every interview. And it sounds like these last interviews that you're doing a couple things. You're looking for those yellow flags. You're also trying to test like their grit, resilience, etc. My guess is you're also trying to sell them on Gong to some degree if they seem like a good fit. Can you talk me through how you structure those, I assume, 30-minute final interviews, Shane?
You bet. You nailed it. Like that's one of those things where I want to spend time getting to know the candidate before they join the company. Part of it is to make sure they come in knowing that they've got sponsorship and they've got an advocate in me. As we've continued to scale, it becomes a little bit more challenging, but still something I strive to want to do. The way that I structure those is typically up front, 2-3 minutes getting to know the candidate. I just want to know their story, what's important to them, what do they do outside of work. Then I go directly into some of the flags the team may have raised, or they may have like prompted me based on their meetings, say, hey, double check this for us. And so the team will usually give me an indicator of where they may want me to go a little bit deeper. But then I really want to know, why have they been successful in the past? Do they know what has caused or led that to occur? And what do they feel like are going to be their biggest challenges coming into the organization and making sure that they're ready and prepared? I'm a big believer that when you come into a company, the first 90 days are going to set the trajectory for what you can accomplish. So if you come in with a lot of thrust and energy, the trajectory or the arc is raised significantly, and the high point you're going to be able to get is much higher. The arc will be steeper than if you come in with low energy, low thrust. So part of that final interview is me challenging them to let them know they have an advocate, but also, hey, we expect high performance. We're building a high performing team. And I want them to hear from me that I will be paying attention and I'm vested in their success. And so I usually use that closing interview almost as a challenging interview as well, to make sure they know that we want to hire people that are going to respectfully push us to new heights. And when you typically do like level up, it allows you to take the entire, it's the ability to raise the entire tide, which all boats come up by continuing to get the right people in that body of water. And it has a really big effect if you can do it the right way.
So, Shane, we talked about if they've given you some yellow flags, you'll bring them up. If you find that you're like, oh my God, this rep is really good, we got to close them. Do you do that on the spot? How do you close out an interview when it's going really well?
Yeah, great question. I probably should do that, Armand. That's a really good coaching tip for me. I'm usually like emotions on my sleeve. It's very rare you're going to get to the end of the interview and be guessing whether or not I liked the candidate or whether I think there's a good mutual fit. And sometimes I get a little overly excited and I'll actually shift gears. And instead of like vetting them, I go into closing them and helping them to get excited. I usually leave it for the hiring manager to do the final close because I really want them to own that candidate's success. And so I will let them know that, hey, I'm a yes. I usually will tell people kind of where I stand at the end of the interview. I don't want them leaving guessing. There are times when there may be additional conversations that need to take place. So maybe something popped up that I don't think the team saw, and I'll be like, "Hey, we need to confer with the team, and then we'll get back to you." But for the really strong ones, I let them know like my support, my excitement, anticipation that they're joining. Usually, if I start asking questions about, "Hey, what is the time you need to give notice?" You're starting to see some of my buying signals kind of shift gears there. So I usually don't close, but I'll try and get a little more information so the team understands what we need to do to bring it to a head.
So I want to go back to the other situation again. Yellow flags coming back, managers pushing back on you. No, this is the person we have to hire. What is your take on non-consensus hiring? And the reason I ask is I've had a lot of bad hires that were all 3 out of 4 across the board. Everyone was like soft yes, soft yes, soft yes, average rep. I've had some really bad hires and some of the best hires I've ever had in my life that were 2s and 4s. It was like, hell yes, no, hell yes, no. And so how do you think about non-consensus hiring?
Well, first I'll say it's an art, it's not science. And I really try and never say to a leader, no. Like I don't want them to feel like I am turning them down if they feel passionately. And so I usually do my best to give them a voice and let them feel like they own the decision because I want them to feel they have the autonomy to build their team the way that they see fit with input from me and other leaders almost as shareholders in the business that they're trying to create and build, whatever scale or level they might be in the organization. The one exception is if you are a new manager and you're making your first or second hire. In my experience, those first 2 hires that you make, maybe you're new to a company, maybe you just got promoted to a leadership position for the first time. Usually those first few hires you make have the potential to make or break you as a leader. And what I mean by that is if you start off hiring C players, there's going to be this theme that you just like continues and it follows you around. It's really hard to become a great leader and get those results that you're after if you start off on the wrong foot. And so if I have a new manager that we've hired or we've recently promoted somebody, I will spend a little bit more time with that leader trying to calibrate and explain to them, hey, the first 2 hires you make are critical. You get these right. It actually not only sets the tone for what you're going to do in this role, but anywhere else you go after, because you're going to see firsthand, even if you didn't get it right, if you really do everything you can to cross off all bases, then you're going to feel much better about that decision and have more conviction, which means you're going to fight more for that person as well. So that's the one exception where I tend to be, I'm not going to overrule them, but I am going to be a little bit more opinionated and trying to make sure we get to the best outcome.
Amazing. Shane, I want to move to your second takeaway. So you talked about the MOR, the manager operating rhythm. And there are a lot of people who are going to be listening to the show that are managers and they might not have gotten guidance around how to run a good one-on-one or how to run a forecasting meeting or a pipeline review. And so let's start with this. What are the common operating rhythms that you have at Gong? So one-on-ones, forecasting, pipeline reviews. Let's start with just that short list of like, what are those rhythms for a manager?
You bet. So it would be the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly rhythms that we get into. So daily are going to be things like coaching on calls, providing assistance on deal reviews. Then you get into weekly that are things like one-on-ones, team huddles and team meetings, forecasting reviews. Monthly, you're looking at more like territory deep dives. You may have individuals that need to have a gap plan because they may be behind on their performance. You may also have, we do use quite heavily what we call performance and coaching plans. Now, there's the good old fashioned PIP that a lot of people, when they hear the performance improvement plan, what they hear in their head is, I'm being let go. We spend a lot of time talking to people about, look, from time to time, performance is going to become varied and you're not going to be achieving the results that either you or the company want. We need to have a mechanism that allows us to flag when we get into one of those situations, and then a plan for how we're going to cure that with a gap plan to get you back on track. So please know that if at any point your performance starts to dip or behavior is not where it should be, we actually have a mechanism to give you signal, hey, we're not meeting the mutual expectations that we agreed to. Here's the steps we're going to take to get you back on track. And so we've got the framework for all of that, that we've spent the time to define what that should look like, and then what happens if we find ourselves in those types of situations. If I can zoom out just for a moment, one of the things that we'll provide as part of the toolkit, I've worked with the leaders that I've been with, it seems like for years, usually is, you go to company, you find people that are incredibly talented, you do your best to try and make sure that they work with you wherever you go. And I have a few folks like that. And I also have some incredible people here at Gong that we've inherited and continue to develop. And then we've hired people from other companies. It gives you a real diverse team and a diverse set of experience and inputs. Working with that group, we've created a taxonomy for building a high performing team. In the very center of that taxonomy is what we call leadership. And leadership is a really misunderstood word. People think, hey, I'm a great leader, or I was promoted to be a leader, so now all of a sudden I come with this innate knowledge or experience because I have the title that tells me how I should do things. Couldn't be further from the truth. And so we spend a lot of time in talking to folks at what it means to show up as a leader and how you should conduct and carry yourself. None of this works, a manager operating rhythm, or even building a high performing team, unless you get that right, unless you have the right level of empathy set internally, unless your team trusts you that you have their best interest at hand. And so there's some elements around execution here that are critical in getting that right. So as you look to execute on whatever process, we call ours a manager operating rhythm, it comes along with an understood implication of that individual knows how to lead and has spent the time to get to know the team. In the environment we find ourselves in right now, where a lot of teams are expected to work in a hybrid or even remote environment, your loyalty is now to your laptop that can be swapped out with just a shipment that comes to your front door. It's no longer about having to pack up a box and physically leave a company. So it makes the switching opportunity very low and very easy to do, which means more than ever, we got to spend time in getting to know our team members and making sure they know that we're vested in their success. And so I did want to get that out there as we talk about operating rhythm, because it's a process thing. And yet, if it's not done appropriately, people are going to feel like they're being micromanaged, or that they're being told how to do things too specifically. And people need a little bit of latitude to be able to operate within a framework that gives them some of the human element where they can apply their own art and creativity to it. And so it's more like an 80-20, where you give people 80% of the guidance that they need and allow them to then take their personality and apply the other 20% to the human element and their individual flair that they can bring to those individual processes that are part of that manager operating rhythm.
Where is the number one non-obvious place that you see new leaders get this wrong?
It's when you go back to the task sheet to think, oh, I've got the playbook. I just got to run the plays now. And I just got to force my team to do it. And I'm going to hold them accountable. If that leader does not spend the time to help the team understand the why and show the results, look, the teams that actually operate this way, here's the results that they get. And what do you think about this? And how do you feel about us buying into this? So even though we're giving them the guidance and asking them to follow on to it, there still is an element of having to go and get people on board and get them bought into you as a leader. And so I think that's where I've seen most of the folks get it wrong. They want to be a good employee, they want to be a good student, they want to be a good leader. And sometimes you think that means just doing things to people without helping them understand the why behind it and the what's in it for them. That's probably the biggest thing I see folks get wrong when it comes to operating rhythm.
Shane, when you first came into Gong, Gong was already known to be one of the highest performing renowned sales orgs out there. And you don't do that by being loosey-goosey. I knew they had opinionated stances on how pipeline review should be done, how forecasts should be done, how one-on-one should be done. But I also know that you probably had a different way that you wanted to do some of these things. And if you came in and just tore up all their existing operating rhythms, you would have had massive organ rejection. And so I'm curious, My guess is you didn't overhaul everything all at once, and you also probably took some time to observe what was working, what was not. How did you slowly transition the team to some of these new operating rhythms in a way that they felt like they were part of the process?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And before I talk about Gong, let me go back to a previous life. When I was at Qualtrics, some know the story. I joined when it was 60 million in revenue, about 300 employees. We went on a tear over about a 4 to 5 year period, went over $1 billion in ARR, went to about 4,000 employees, ended up getting acquired by SAP for 8 billion. And then subsequently that company was spun out and IPO for 27 billion, really uncommon. So just like one incredible milestone and exit after the previous one. When you look at it from the outside, it looks like this like steep growth curve and just everything was amazing and easy. If you would have walked in that building during any point in that ride, what you would have witnessed is pure and utter chaos and people hanging on for dear life. And even moments where folks were wondering, like, is the ship going down? And the way that I've described it to people, it's like being in a go kart that's designed to go about 15, 20 miles an hour. There's no structure around you, it's just this free flow. And you're going like downhill, going about 120, and you're feeling like the wheels are about to come off and it's going to combust and explode at any moment. It's a fun ride, but it's not rainbows and butterflies and it's not easy. So Gong has been on an incredible ride, has amazing talent, and just like every other company that goes through growth, if you walk inside the four walls, what you see does not look like what you are experiencing from the outside. Companies get stuck in growth, they get stuck in process, you get stuck in ICP. Typically, companies that are successful, when you go from like call it 50 million to over a billion, you're going to have to redesign and re-architect that machine, that process, that team at least 2 or 3 times on that journey, if not more. And companies get stuck at different points. And so when I arrived, while I inherited this incredible culture, an amazing product, team members that cared so deeply about each other, it was one of the best environments I've been able to step into. There was no shortage of opportunity to try and enhance, optimize, and further drive what we could do as a team. And so what I ended up doing, and I've learned this after going into a few of the companies, for the first 90 days, not only did I not change anything, I didn't even share any opinion with anybody. I went on a listening tour. We have a big research and development team. Our product engineering are based in Tel Aviv, Israel. My second week, I flew to Israel, got to know that team very intimately, like went to dinner with them, got to know what makes them tick, what's important. And I did this with each function. And so I really spent time trying to understand who the company was and what was important to them before I started even thinking about any changes. Now, I happened to arrive at the beginning of a Q3. And so that first quarter was real listening. And then Q4, there's no way I'm going to change anything. We're trying to finish a year strong. But during that Q4, we basically started enacting all of the potential adjustments, changes, and pivots that we needed to make. And there were quite a few. And then we ended up introducing that at our revenue kickoff in February. And the reality of it is, when we introduced that, there were a lot of people that were concerned, that were feeling like, hey, this isn't the same place I used to know. And it's hard for people to navigate and go through change. Now, we've just had the best 2 quarters in our Q1 and Q2, and we're set to even exceed that now in Q3. So, fortunately, like the changes that we got the team to buy into, they're working. That's not always the case. Sometimes it doesn't go as well as quickly as you would like, and you have to like stay the course. And so, just kind of like zooming out from that, what I would share is it's never pretty and fun when you're on a hyper growth ride. That's what makes it exciting for those of us that enjoy doing it. And change is hard. And so, you got to make sure that you understand what your process is going to be. And you shouldn't be changing anything until you win people over and gain the trust and the support across the teams that you're looking to drive some of that change. And then having champions that can help you along the way as you enact that change in each team and department really goes a long way.
One last question on this, because I think it's a really important nuance. You talk about winning champions internally, because your managers and your directors, they're the ones who are going to be rolling this out on the front lines with their reps, and they're the ones who have the trust with the sellers. Could you talk about how you got your managers on board with some of these changes?
Yeah, when I came into Gong, I probably didn't do this as well as I needed to. And we had This is me owning up a mistake that I made in retrospect. I read a book recently. It's called No Rules Rules. It's about Netflix. There's so many
Great
good
book.
nuggets in there. Yeah, you've read it. It's a great read. One of the terms they use in there is called farming for dissent. And so that first go around of change, I don't think I spent enough time with the leaders and helping to get their input and their feedback, and then explaining to them some of the why. And so, actually, one of the things we've just done is we've set up what we call a Revenue Leadership Advisory Council, and we've taken about 3 to 4% of our frontline staff, and they were nominated by their peers. They now have become an advisory panel for our revenue leadership team. And so now, when we have significant changes that we're looking to deploy, we're using them as a way to farm for dissent. And by the way, if you don't have this mechanism inside your company and you're listening to this today, you don't have to have a formal mechanism to do this. You can actually go and be vocal in a very productive way. Like, don't ever complain about anything that isn't going right or that you think could be done better. Instead, share, hey, I've noticed this. Here's what I'd recommend that we could do. Is there anything else that you all are thinking about doing? And that will lead to a discussion rather than a criticism. And so I think that's a really good approach if you don't have these other mechanisms. And we're still in learning mode, but that's kind of one of the things I learned recently, having gone through quite a bit of change at Gong. And I think given the current environment we're in, you got macroeconomic challenges, you've got competitive threats and challenges, you've got the rules of the game shifting from growth at all costs to efficiency. I think a lot of companies are going through having to find a better way to revenue. And so when that is the case, you've got to make sure that you bring people along in that journey. So it's a really good question.
Shane, I appreciate you also just answering that with a little bit of vulnerability, because just the way you've done this interview, you could have come up with the really crisp answer of the 17 steps to get managers on board. But I appreciate you taking some of your own advice that you talked about in the early interviews of talking about some of the things that you do differently. So, man, this was an amazing show. We have to move to the final question. It's this. We talked about a lot of good habits leaders can exhibit, but what is one bad habit that every sales leader should break so that all sales teams get a little bit better?
I would say a bad habit is pretending or feeling like you have to have an answer. And this shows up in every meeting every single day. When you're with your team or you're with an executive or leader and you're asked a question, one of the best answers I've heard is, I don't know, but let me go get some information and can I come back to you? Even if we're on a sales call, being able to slow down for a moment and acknowledge or take a pause before you jump into an answer. We're in an age and a day when everyone's expected to know everything and business is moving so rapidly. I think a little bit more candor, a little bit more vulnerability and empathy goes a long way. And so I would recommend, don't feel like you have to have the answers, regardless of the setting that you're in. Be thoughtful, be curious, go find out if there's a better way to solve some of the challenges or opportunities that you're facing.
Dude, amazing show. Everyone, hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Alrighty, Nick, it's time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Shane Evans. What do you have for your 2?
Number 1 was an amazing interview question, which is simply, what did you do to prepare for this interview? This shows you, 1, did they actually prepare? And 2, the depth of their answer takes you into some of that will. Are they someone who shows up prepared to these high stakes calls when they are literally interviewing for a job with the CRO? So that was number 1. Number 2 was the way that Shane structures the final interview in the interview process with somebody that he's hiring. He spends 2 to 3 minutes up front getting to know the other person. Then he digs into some of those yellow flags that his team raised for him that they said, hey, we need you to go pressure test these. Then he asks the other person about, tell me about a role you've been really successful in. And then he digs in to figure out, do they actually know why they were successful? He doesn't want to bring aboard people where it's just dumb luck. From there, he asks them about the biggest challenges that they suspect they will have if they come aboard at Gong. And the whole tenor of this is meant to be a bit challenging because he's trying to build a very high-performance organization, and he wants to bring people aboard who are ready for a challenge. So that is the Shane CRO interview structure.
Number 3. Shane will oftentimes highlight yellow flags at the end of an interview process. If he has an experienced manager that's really willing to challenge and bang the table to hire that person, Shane will oftentimes let the manager make the final decision. But the exception is if you have a junior manager who is making their first couple of hires. If they get in the habit of hiring B and C players, it is really hard to have long-term success as a leader, and that's when you need to step in. And then lastly, number 4, folks, I've made this mistake in the past. When you start to have multiple managers on your team, you need to standardize the way that you run a pipeline review, standardize the way you run a forecast call, standardize the way that you should run a one-on-one. And you want to get 80% of it standardized so that they can show their personality and flex and get creative for that 20%. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
So in this episode, we talked quite a bit about how to bring aboard the high performance team. But the next thing you want to do is make sure that team gets onboarded and ramped and is hitting the ground with a lot of momentum. And fortunately, 30MPC and Gong are here to help. If you didn't know, we put together a full masterclass with a section for leaders and one for reps on how to onboard and ramp. For leaders, we have a play-by-play structure of day by day, week over week, how to build out the curriculum for onboarding and space things out. And for sellers, we have best practices for how you can make sure you get ramped and start getting in deep accelerator territory. So check it out. There's a link in the show notes, and we will see you next week on the show.